If you had walked into our conference room that morning, you would have thought it was a place where important things happened. The glass walls gleamed. The tables stretched long and expensive beneath carefully arranged leather chairs. Awards lined the hallway outside like medals on a decorated soldier's chest. Success lived here. Reputation lived here. Power sat at the head of the table and cleared its throat before speaking. What you wouldn't have seen, what most people never saw, was how quickly that same room could turn into an arena. I learned early that survival there depended on one skill above all others: silence. I wasn't the loudest analyst on the team. I wasn't the boldest or the most charismatic. I was meticulous. I double-checked numbers. I stayed late. I caught mistakes before they turned into disasters. I believed competence would be enough. I believed hard work spoke for itself. It turned out hard work doesn't speak. People do. And the people who spoke the loudest in that room had discovered something about me. I didn't fight back. The first time it happened, it felt harmless. We were reviewing quarterly projections, and I pointed out an inconsistency in one of the revenue forecasts. I didn't accuse anyone. I just asked a question. "Are you sure you want to double-check that?" I said quietly. Ryan leaned back in his chair and laughed. "Oh, look at that. The intern found a calculator." The room chuckled. I smiled, because that's what you do when the joke is technically about you, but everyone insists it's not personal. "I'm not an intern," I said softly. "Right," he replied. "Associate, same thing, different badge." More laughter. It was small, manageable, a scratch, not a wound. But scratches accumulate. Over time, the jokes sharpened. They disguised themselves as banter, wrapped in corporate friendliness. "Careful," someone would say when I spoke. "We don't want to overcomplicate this." "Don't worry," another would add. "We'll translate the big words for you." It was always framed as humor, always delivered with a grin, always followed by that collective sound, the room's approval. Laughter is a powerful weapon. It turns cruelty into entertainment. And I let it. Because silence felt safer. I told myself that reacting would make it worse. That speaking up would brand me as sensitive, difficult, unable to take a joke. In an environment where promotions depended on perception, I couldn't afford to be perceived as fragile. So I perfected the art of controlled expression: neutral smile, slight nod, pen moving across notebook, eyes steady. Inside, though, something else was happening. Each comment chipped away at a part of me that used to feel solid. Confidence eroded slowly, like stone beneath persistent water. I began rehearsing my sentences before meetings, editing myself down to the smallest possible presence. Fewer words meant fewer targets. I became efficient, invisible. And invisibility, I convinced myself, was strength. There is a difference between being quiet and being diminished. I blurred that line until I could no longer see it. The company thrived on dominance. That was the unspoken rule. You claimed space by occupying it loudly. You interrupted to prove authority. You mocked to signal superiority. It wasn't written in the employee handbook, but everyone understood. Power versus vulnerability. They chose power. I chose endurance. Sometimes, late at night when the office emptied and the fluorescent lights hummed like distant static, I would sit alone and replay the day. I would think of the moments I could have answered differently. Clever responses I hadn't delivered, boundaries I hadn't drawn. But in the morning, when the conference room doors shut and the eyes turned toward whoever was speaking, my throat would tighten again. And I would stay silent. It wasn't that I didn't have thoughts. It was that I had measured the cost of voicing them and decided it was too high. That illusion held until the morning everything tipped. The board meeting was scheduled for 10. Executives from headquarters were flying in. Investors would be present via video conference. The presentation mattered. Months of work were condensed into 30 slides and a narrow window of scrutiny. I had built most of the underlying analysis. Not that anyone mentioned it. Ryan was leading the presentation. He always did. He had the confidence for it, the voice, the timing, the kind of face that filled a room and expected it to listen. I arrived early, laptop under my arm, pulse already elevated. The air in the conference room felt different that day, charged, anticipatory, the kind of energy that hums before a storm. At the far end of the table sat a woman I didn't recognize. She wore a charcoal suit, hair pulled back neatly, expression composed. She wasn't part of our usual executive circle. "Who's that?" I whispered to Jenna as I took my seat. "Outside counsel," she murmured. "Corporate compliance audit, just observing." "A lawyer." I nodded, barely thinking about it. Lawyers attended meetings sometimes. They blended into the background, taking notes, rarely speaking unless something went wrong. Nothing was supposed to go wrong. Ryan began smoothly. Numbers, projections, growth curves climbing like obedient soldiers. The board members nodded. Investors watched through screens. Halfway through the presentation, he clicked to a slide outlining risk mitigation strategies. My slide. "And here," he said, "we have our risk model. Simplified, of course, we didn't want to overthink it." A ripple of amusement moved through the room. He glanced in my direction. "Our team member here tends to enjoy complexity." Laughter. "Thankfully," he continued, "we filtered out the unnecessary paranoia." More laughter, louder. I felt the familiar heat rise to my face. This was routine, predictable. I could survive it. But then one of the board members leaned forward. "What do you mean by paranoia?" Ryan smirked. "Well, someone thought we should account for worst-case litigation exposure in a scenario that's practically impossible." The board member's gaze shifted to me. "Someone." Ryan gestured openly this time. "Our in-house alarm system." The room erupted. The laughter was different now. Not just team banter, not just internal teasing. It echoed against glass walls and into microphones transmitting to investors. I sat upright, hands folded neatly, breathing steady. Inside, something cracked. "Would you like to explain your concern?" the board member asked me. My throat tightened, every pair of eyes turned. Here it was, the moment I usually avoided. Speak and risk dismissal. Stay silent and confirm their narrative. Ryan leaned back, still smiling, as if watching a child attempt something beyond their ability. My voice faltered. Laughter again, quieter but sharper. "I suggested," I managed, "that we model potential compliance risk under expanded regulatory scrutiny." Silence, thin and brittle. Ryan chuckled. "See, paranoia." The word landed harder this time. The board member frowned slightly. "Compliance risk is not paranoia." Ryan shrugged. "Of course not, just unlikely." He moved to click the next slide. And that's when she spoke. "May I?" The voice was calm, even, not loud but precise enough to cut through the room. Every head turned toward the lawyer at the end of the table. She hadn't smiled once during the meeting. She hadn't reacted to the laughter. She had simply observed. Ryan hesitated. "Of course." She folded her hands neatly atop her notepad. "I'd like clarification. Was the risk analysis conducted and then removed from the final model?" The room stilled. Ryan's smile thinned. "We streamlined it." "Streamlined," she repeated, "or dismissed." A pause. "Dismissed," he said finally. She nodded. "On what basis?" "It was excessive." She tilted her head slightly. "Excessive caution or excessive liability exposure." The air shifted. The laughter evaporated, leaving behind something heavier, uncertainty. Ryan cleared his throat. "We're confident in our compliance." She held his gaze. "Confidence does not replace documentation." No one laughed. She turned toward me. "Did you prepare the risk analysis?" "Yes," I said, surprised that my voice didn't shake. "Is it available?" "Yes." "Would you be willing to circulate it to the board?" The board member who had asked about paranoia nodded. "I'd appreciate that." Ryan's jaw tightened. The lawyer continued, tone still measured. Mocking internal risk assessment is not an effective compliance strategy. The sentence fell into the room like a gavel. No anger, no accusation, just fact. She wasn't defending me personally. She was reframing the narrative entirely. This wasn't about paranoia. It was about governance. It was about responsibility. The power dynamic shifted so subtly that at first I wasn't sure it had happened at all. But I saw it in the way Ryan adjusted his posture, in the way the board members straightened, in the absence of laughter. Authority versus cruelty. Integrity versus mob mentality. The lawyer hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't called anyone out by name, yet the tone of the room had changed. For the first time in months, I felt something unfamiliar in that conference room. Not fear. Validation. The meeting continued, but the energy was different. Questions were sharper. Jokes disappeared. The slides felt less like performance and more like examination. When it ended, chairs scraped softly against the floor. Conversations resumed in lower tones. I gathered my laptop, ready to slip out unnoticed as usual. "Excuse me," the lawyer said. I looked up. "May I have a word?" My pulse spiked again, but not with the same dread as before. Ryan avoided my eyes as he exited. Others followed, their expressions unreadable. The lawyer waited until the room emptied. Up close, she looked even more composed. Not cold, just steady. "I'm Maya Thompson," she said, "external counsel for compliance review." I know who you are," she replied gently. "I've read your reports." Something in my chest tightened. "They're thorough," she continued, "unusually thorough." "Thank you," I said, unsure whether gratitude or suspicion should dominate. She studied me for a moment, not in the way the others did, scanning for weakness, in a different way, evaluating. "Has this been ongoing?" she asked. I hesitated. Silence, my old ally, rose instinctively to protect me. "It's fine," I said automatically. "They're just jokes." She didn't react to the deflection. "Humor is often used to normalize dismissal," she said calmly, "particularly when someone's competence challenges the status quo." I swallowed. She continued. "What I witnessed today crossed into something else." "Into what?" I asked, almost afraid of the answer. "Potential retaliation and a hostile work environment." The words felt heavy, legal, dangerous. "I don't want trouble," I said quickly. She held my gaze. Wanting accountability is not the same as wanting trouble. The room felt smaller now, but not suffocating, focused. "I've been observing this team for weeks," she said. "Patterns matter. Today was not isolated." My heart pounded. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," she replied, "that silence protects patterns." Silence protects patterns. The phrase echoed in my mind. I had believed silence protected me. Protected my job, my reputation, my future. But what if it had only protected them? She closed her notebook. "I'd like to speak further, privately, not here." The hallway outside buzzed faintly with post-meeting chatter. "Why?" I asked. "Because what you choose to do next matters." There it was, the pivot. Stay silent and let the room reset to its old rhythm. Or step into something uncertain. Something that might finally shift the balance. I looked back at the empty chairs, the polished table, the glass walls that reflected success and concealed cruelty. For the first time, the room didn't feel invincible. It felt exposed. "I'll listen," I said. And as we walked out together, I realized something had already changed. Silence no longer felt safe. It felt temporary. I didn't sleep the night after Maya asked to speak with me. Silence had always been my shield. Now it felt like a door someone had quietly unlocked, and I wasn't sure whether to step through it or bolt it shut again. We met the next morning in a small conference room 2 floors above my department. It didn't have glass walls. No awards lined the hall. No executives hovered nearby. It felt neutral, controlled, intentional. Maya sat across from me, a legal pad open, pen aligned neatly with its edge. "I want to be clear," she began. "Yesterday was not an isolated observation." My stomach tightened. It was just a rough meeting. She held my gaze. "No, it was a pattern. There's something unnerving about hearing your private pain described as a pattern. It turns isolated embarrassment into documented behavior. I've attended 3 team briefings and reviewed internal communications," she continued. "The tone toward you is consistent." "They don't mean anything by it," I said quickly. I heard the reflex in my own voice. Defensive, protective, not of myself, of them. "Intent does not erase impact," she replied. Fear versus justice. I could feel the two forces pulling at me. Justice sounded powerful in theory. Fear was practical. Fear paid my rent. Fear kept my performance reviews clean. Fear kept me employed. "I don't want to file a complaint," I said. "I don't want to escalate anything." Maya didn't argue. She simply asked, "Why?" "Because I've worked too hard to get here." "And what does here look like?" she asked calmly. The question lingered. Here looked like polished floors and quiet humiliation. It looked like swallowing words. It looked like carefully measured silence. "It's competitive," I said finally. "People tease, it's normal." She wrote something down. "Let me reframe that," she said. "Repeated public ridicule tied to your professional judgment. Undermining your expertise in front of decision makers. Dismissing documented analysis without review. That is not teasing. That is potential harassment and professional sabotage." The words felt heavy. Legal language carries gravity. It refuses to soften edges. "I don't feel harassed," I said. She paused. "How do you feel?" I hesitated. Small. There it was. "I feel like I have to prove myself twice," I admitted. "And even then, it's a joke." She nodded once. "That's impact. Silence protects patterns." Her phrase from yesterday echoed again. "What happens if I say something?" I asked. "We document," she replied. "We examine, we evaluate whether workplace misconduct has occurred. And then we hold people accountable if it has." Accountability. It sounded simple, clean. But accountability disrupts hierarchy. It threatens comfort. It exposes behavior people would rather leave unexamined. "They'll retaliate," I said quietly. "Retaliation is unlawful," she responded. "That doesn't mean it doesn't happen." She leaned back slightly. "You're right, it does happen, which is why silence is often mistaken for safety." Safety versus stagnation. She folded her hands. "I'm not here to force you into anything, but I need you to understand something. What happened yesterday was not about humor, it was about power. And power, when left unchecked, expands." The room felt smaller, more honest. "If you choose to remain silent," she continued, "that is your right, but understand the cost. It protects aggressors, not peace." I thought about the countless times I had laughed along. The meetings where I had let Ryan's smirk dictate the narrative. The emails where my suggestions were rewritten without credit. The calendar invites I wasn't included on until decisions were finalized. They weren't random. They were systematic. My silence hadn't kept the peace. It had fed the imbalance. "I don't want revenge," I said. "Good," Maya replied. "Revenge is emotional, accountability is structural." There was no heat in her voice, just clarity. "And if we find nothing?" I asked. "Then nothing changes," she said. "But at least the examination will have occurred." Examination. For months I had examined myself. My tone, my word choice, my facial expressions. I had assumed the flaw lived within me. What if the examination belonged elsewhere? I took a breath. "What would you need from me?" She didn't hesitate. Documentation. The word felt heavier than confrontation. Emails, meeting notes. Any recordings if policy permits, dates, witnesses. Witnesses. I thought of Jenna's tight smile during jokes, of Mark's quick glance downward whenever laughter spiked. of the interns who watched and learned which behavior earned applause. They had witnessed it. Had I? Or had I normalized it so thoroughly that it blurred into background noise? I began revisiting my inbox that afternoon. The first email I opened was from 3 months ago. Subject, risk assessment draft. I had attached a 12-page analysis outlining potential compliance exposure under evolving regulatory conditions. Ryan's reply, appreciate the enthusiasm. Let's keep it simple. No need to scare anyone. No need to scare anyone. I scrolled further. In another thread, I suggested revisiting a vendor contract clause. His response, copied to senior leadership, our resident alarm bell strikes again. There it was in writing. Alarm bell. I hadn't saved it because I thought it was important. I had saved it because I told myself someday I would laugh about it. Now I saw it differently. Mockery in front of decision makers shifts perception. It frames competence as paranoia. It undermines credibility before you speak. I began compiling. Screenshots, PDFs, calendar records, meeting summaries where my contributions were omitted but later presented by someone else. The process felt surreal, like assembling pieces of a puzzle I hadn't realized I was solving. Flashbacks came uninvited. Ryan leaning back in his chair. You worry too much. The team laughing when I asked for additional documentation. A senior manager whispering, relax, you're intense. At the time, I had internalized each comment, adjusted myself to be less intense, less detailed, less visible. Now I examine them with distance. Intensity versus diligence. Worry versus foresight. Paranoia versus prevention. Language shapes perception. And perception shapes power. By the end of the week, I had compiled a folder thick enough to feel undeniable. When I handed it to Maya, my hands trembled. She didn't comment on the volume. She simply began reading. This is consistent, she said after an hour. With what? Patterned undermining. The phrase sounded clinical, precise. You understand, she continued, that if we proceed formally, this becomes institutional. Institutional meant HR, documentation, interviews, legal review. It meant the room with the glass walls would no longer be an arena. It would become evidence. I swallowed. Will my name be attached? Yes. There it was. Fear versus courage. I had survived by shrinking. Stepping forward required expansion. I need to think, I said. Of course, she replied, but don't take too long. Patterns solidify when left untouched. That night, I sat alone at my kitchen table, staring at the folder on my laptop. I thought about the version of me who had walked into that company full of belief, the one who thought competence was enough, the one who saw risk as responsibility, not paranoia. I had shrunk to survive. But survival without dignity is not peace. The next morning, I emailed Maya. Let's proceed. The investigation began quietly. HR scheduled interviews under the guise of a compliance review. Emails were requested, meeting transcripts examined. At first, nothing changed. Ryan still cracked jokes, still smirked. But there was a flicker now, a hesitation. Word travels in corporations the way smoke travels in buildings. Subtle at first, then impossible to ignore. During one meeting, when he began to make a comment about my overactive imagination, he paused, cleared his throat. And as my colleague pointed out, he corrected, we should review regulatory exposure. The room was quieter. Mockery versus accountability. Confidence versus caution. He didn't know what evidence had been collected. He didn't know who had spoken to HR. Uncertainty crept into his tone. Jenna stopped by my desk one afternoon. Are you okay? She asked softly. Yes, I said. She hesitated. I've noticed things. Witnesses. Have you ever felt uncomfortable? I asked. She nodded, but I didn't want to make it worse for you. Isolation versus allyship. I realized something then. Silence isolates not just the target, but the observers. It convinces everyone they are alone in noticing. The formal complaint was filed 3 weeks later. The language was clinical, detailed, supported. When Ryan was notified, the laughter disappeared entirely. He requested a meeting with me. "I don't know what this is about," he said, tone tight. "If you felt uncomfortable, you could have talked to me." I held his gaze. "I tried," I said. He blinked. "When?" "Every time I raised a concern, and you dismissed it publicly." That was joking. It didn't feel like joking. He leaned back, mirroring his old posture, but without the ease. "You're overreacting." Maybe once, that word would have shrunk me. Now it clarified everything. "This isn't about reaction," I replied. "It's about documentation." His jaw tightened. Arrogance versus accountability. For the first time, he didn't control the narrative. The deposition was scheduled a month later. I had never been in one before. The room was sterile, controlled. Lawyers present, HR representatives, a court reporter. Maya sat beside me. Ryan sat across. There was no laughter here. Maya began calmly. "Mr. Collins, do you recall referring to Ms. as an alarm bell in front of senior leadership?" He shifted. "It was a joke." "Is it standard practice in your department to characterize risk assessments as paranoia?" "No." "Yet you did so on multiple documented occasions." He glanced at me. I didn't look away. Silence as submission versus silence as strategy. I wasn't silent because I had nothing to say. I was silent because the evidence was speaking. Email excerpts were read aloud. Calendar invites examined. Witness testimony referenced. Each joke, when isolated, had seemed harmless. Together, they formed a narrative. Pattern. Maya's voice never rose. She never accused. She simply aligned facts. By the end of the deposition, the confidence that once filled the conference room had evaporated. Settlement discussions followed. The company offered mediation, policy revisions, leadership training, a formal acknowledgement of misconduct. Professional consequences were imposed. Ryan was removed from direct supervisory authority pending review. His annual bonus was withheld. It wasn't dramatic. No shouting, no public spectacle. Just structural correction. I was offered a transfer to a different division, with a promotion tied to my documented expertise. When HR informed me, I felt something unexpected. Relief. Not triumph, not revenge. Relief. The day the outcome was finalized, I walked past the glass conference room. It looked the same. But I didn't. Silence had once been my armor, then it became evidence. Now it felt like choice. Maya met me in the lobby, before she left the building for the final time. "You did the difficult part," she said. "I didn't do it alone," I replied. She nodded. "No one should have to." As she turned to leave, I realized something else. Justice had not arrived because I shouted the loudest. It arrived because someone refused to let cruelty echo unchallenged. Strength without cruelty, vindication without vengeance. I still speak carefully. I still measure my words. But now, when I speak, the room listens differently. And when I choose silence, it is no longer fear. It is power.